Welcome to the visionarywoman.com.
And many of the chronic medical conditions that we deal with on a daily basis stem from excess weight. So things like heart disease, obesity, blood pressure problems, in some cases even infertility, stem from being overweight. And so this really was a way for me to address multiple medical problems through a more holistic approach. Conditions, for example, polycystic ovaries, which is associated with excess weight, as well as infertility. But even in the absence of that, there's been much evidence that demonstrated higher BMI, which is the way we classify excess weight, is associated with anovulation, so meaning that women are not ovulating at higher BMIs, and therefore infertility. The cool thing is that you get people to lose really small amounts of weight, 5%, 10% of their body weight. So imagine a woman is 200 pounds and loses 10 to 20 pounds. You can restore ovulation. Disease of obesity, and physicians in medicine now characterizes obesity as a disease because of the science that's behind it. But unfortunately, the disease of obesity is visible to the outside world. So unlike diabetes, where you can't walk down the street and pinpoint the person who has the disease of diabetes, you can pinpoint the person that has the disease of obesity. And this is associated with bias, it's associated with social stigma, and of course it affects the confidence of the individual. For years, we always talked about obesity being this issue of calories in, calories out, right? And we know that over the last many years, fast food, sodas, caloric drinks have all contributed to obesity, as has the lack or the reduction in physical activity. So we're just not as active. People are working longer hours, more sedentary jobs, sitting at the desk. And so it seemed like the problem was really a function of more calories, less activity. We now know that there are a lot of other environmental contributors. So for example, there are certain factors in our environment, pollutants, for example, that are classified as this thing called obesogens. They are these, again, aspects of our environment that can actually impact our weight in a more physiologic way. So what do I mean by that? For example, if a mother is exposed to tobacco or certain types of toxins, it may affect her genetics in a way that she passes on that likelihood of obesity to the child. It's something that we can still control. Unfortunately, we can't control for all the toxins in our environment, so that's not what I'm trying to relay. But what I am saying is that there are a lot of factors out there that may contribute to a person's likelihood of becoming overweight and may explain why we all have those friends who can eat anything they want and never gain. Whereas if we do half of that, for example, we would gain a lot more. So there is variability, and some of that variability is in our genetic makeup. It's something we can do something about, right? I mean, we can't do necessarily anything about the fact that we live in a city that has pollution. But smoking is something we can do something about. Children of mothers who are smokers will be born usually lower birth weight. Yeah. But they will have 60% higher chance of obesity in their lifetime. It's an area that is very active in scientific research. Like I said, obesity, while the public may still kind of consider it as a cosmetic problem, we know that it is a medical problem. It is a disease in and of itself, and it's associated with so many diseases, like we mentioned earlier, diabetes, heart disease, blood pressure issues, etc. And there's a great amount of scientific research that is going on in trying to figure out exactly what is behind obesity. The truth of the matter is that it's what we call multifactorial, meaning that it's not just one thing that someone can discover and figure out. There are a lot of factors that go into determining whether somebody has a normal weight or becomes overweight or has a propensity to become overweight. a lot of factors. And so one answer may not be the answer for all individuals. The good news is, though, that regardless of the history, regardless of the smoking in the mother, for example, because that's what we were talking about earlier, there are changes that everybody can make that can help them live a healthier lifestyle, can help them not only lose weight, but be healthier as a result. So we talk about dietary changes. Obviously, diet is going to be very important. We talk about physical activity. We know that exercise and getting your body moving is important not only for weight loss, but for many, many other health benefits. And we can talk about how exercise improves diabetes, for example. Even if you don't lose an ounce of weight as a result of that exercise,
right.
Just the fact that you do the exercise will reduce your risk of developing diabetes, and in diabetics will improve insulin resistance. But outside of diet and sleep, for example, so we now know that there is a very strong correlation between reduced sleep and excess weight, such that individuals who sleep less than 7 hours at night are 6% more likely to be overweight and obese. And it's not just because people may be up longer and have more time for eating. It's not just a matter of calories, but actually we know that hunger hormones that are released from the stomach and from our intestines are released in a way or to a degree that promotes hunger. Therefore, if you reduce your sleep, your hunger hormones will go up. It kind of is like when we were younger and pulled all-nighters studying for exams. You know that carb craving you get that next morning? There's actually a physiology behind that. That challenge. The fact that there are socioeconomic barriers to healthy eating and healthy living, because physical activity is also affected based on where you live and if you have access to parks, for example. But you know, even if it's not perfection, there are ways to get around that. So if you can't get fresh, get frozen, which in many cases is just as good. Getting a bag of frozen broccoli, for example, is almost as good as the fresh thing. If that can't happen, the cans, again, it's not perfect, but it is your next best thing. It is better than a calorie-dense, I don't know, cookie, muffin that provides zero nutritional value. So while admittedly these challenges exist and it becomes harder, I think there are ways of getting around it. Protein, for example, we know that having adequate protein is so important for maintaining a healthy weight. And to that end, time for preparation. A problem that is not just in lower socioeconomic communities, but in all of our communities is lack of time. And what my patients often struggle with is, how am I going to have time to prepare a healthy meal? Even there are ways to meet those barriers and address those challenges. I'll give you an example. Rotisserie chicken, $5.99
Yes.
at the local supermarket. Much better than getting takeout because you don't have time, and much cheaper, by the way.
Oh yeah.
So getting a rotisserie chicken, which is a healthy protein, and a few bags of frozen vegetables, and maybe a can of beans, complex carbohydrates, is a very balanced, healthy meal, low calorie, relatively inexpensive, and the preparation is negligible. We talked about those different buckets, the diet, the exercise, the sleep. Let's start with that. So from a dietary perspective, a healthy diet is a balanced diet. So I recommend as much as possible to have that kind of balanced diet 3 times a day. What that means is not skipping breakfast, not saving all of your calories for dinner, not having only carbs for breakfast and all your protein at dinner, but really trying to make a balanced meal at every meal. What does a balanced meal look like? Well, if you look at the plate, the food plate, which has now been put out by the FDA, half of that plate is green. And half of that plate should be green, whether it's fresh vegetables or fresh fruit. That's what we're kind of symbolizing there. Half the plate should be some kind of fruit or vegetable. And if not fresh, fruit or vegetable. A quarter should be protein, and that goes for the breakfast, the mornings too. You can have eggs, you can have tofu, you can have a protein shake if you can't manage protein, but having a protein. And then the third piece is a complex carbohydrate. That means not the white stuff. Bread is okay, but think about those breads that are complex carbohydrates. They include grains and seeds, and they're not processed. The more processed that food is, the less energy it takes for us to process it ourselves. So trying to have that as the most complex carbohydrate as you can. So a balanced meal. The second recommendation would be physical activity. It is so hard to get people to start exercising because they think they need fancy machinery, they think they need a class pass or a gym. You just need 30 minutes of time that you've dedicated to activity. Whether that means going for a walk in your neighborhood, whether that means walking around the track while you're watching your kids play football, whether that means putting in your favorite music and dancing around your living room, 30 minutes of activity every day. And do it for yourself and do it for your family because you're role modeling that to your kids. So the second would be physical activity. The third is sleep. We are all on our phones, on the computer, watching TV until, the second before lights out. We need to shut it down and shut it off and give ourselves at least 7 hours of sleep a night to let the body recuperate and to allow our bodies to restore. Recognizing that if we don't do that, we're going to wake up the next morning with the hunger hormones raging. And by the way, sleeplessness also affects sugar metabolism and insulin resistance. So if you are having sleep deprivation, you're more likely to develop insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes as a function of lack of sleep. So the third thing would be not only for weight purposes, but for health purposes, better sleep. The last two, one I would say is planning. A lot of times we find it difficult to find the right foods to eat when we're already at work. Find the right foods to eat when we're already starving. Find the time to exercise when it's 5 p.m. But you know what? If we spend a little bit of time on a Sunday planning out the week, planning out the meals, planning out the time for activity, much more likely for us to achieve those healthy behaviors if we've planned for those healthy behaviors. And then the last one I would say is staying accountable. Be accountable to yourself. Whether that means keeping a notebook and a paper and writing down the foods that you eat, whether that means downloading an app, and we, by the way, have an app called FitNote, which helps you track your food intake, your calories, your exercise, your water intake, everything, healthy recipes, as well as health tips. So I'm going to put in a plug out there, FitNote, free on the iTunes store. But whatever it is, it doesn't have to be an app, it can be a journal. Write down what you're eating, write down what you're doing, and be accountable to that. And also, people are afraid of getting on the scale. I'm not a proponent of getting on the scale 5 times a day and, beating yourself up about a couple pounds up, a couple pounds down. But you know what? You have to stay accountable to yourself. And getting on the scale once a week to see to chart your course and see where your trajectory is is really a great way to stay accountable, provided that you don't beat yourself up, but then use that weight gain as a reminder to get back into the healthy behaviors. FitNote. Sometimes we forget the second T, that's why I spelled it out for you. But it is a handy little app because you can track all your food intake. There's even a scanner on it so that you can scan barcodes that automatically will feed all the nutritional information into your phone. You can track your exercise. You can sync it to your Fitbit, as well as to your scale at home so that it's all integrated. Contact me via my website, which is dradrienneyoudim.com. There is a contact me form on there that goes directly to me, and so I'm happy to ask or answer questions. The app also has a place where you can ask me questions, and I get questions all the time. So I would love that. If you do go onto the website, you can also sign up for our newsletter so that you can get our daily health tips and blog.
TheVisionaryWoman.com. Watch our host of insightful video exchange interviews. Listen to the Visionary Woman Hotspot Talk Radio to empower your evenings, and read fascinating articles of inspiration and perseverance, all with you in mind. Visit us on our social media handles, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.